So let's kick this off. Welcome everybody to tonight's Written Conversations. It's a series of online chats with writers and about writing. I'm Beck, I'm the co-author of Written, How to Keep Writing and Build a Habit That Lasts. And tonight we are exploring some of the themes that come up in chapter 1 of the book, which is called Break the Rules. I am joined by Cathy Rentzenbrink, and I'm going to give her a full introduction in a second. But first, just a couple of words about how it's going to work this evening. So this event is live, so please do add comments to the chat if you've got questions. We're going to hopefully get to them at the end of the session. And if you are watching this on catch up, do like, follow, comment, you know the drill on that. So let's get started. I'm here with Cathy Rentzenbrink, who is the author of 5 books. Her first was a memoir, The Last Act of Love, and she's written a Dear Reader on the comfort and joy of reading, Write It All Down, a guide to putting your life on the page. There's also the wonderful new edition of How to Feel Better, which I thoroughly recommend everyone grabs a copy of, hot off the press, and her novel, Everyone Is Still Alive. Cathy is also one of the hardest working people in writing and I suppose literary circles, I would say, chairing events, interviewing authors, podcasting. And she describes herself as a writer who likes to encourage, and she does that in spades. She supports writers in prison, those learning to read and write. She runs her own Sunday sessions, which are absolutely brilliant, as well as teaching courses for Arvon and Dyslexia and Curtis Brown, amongst others. And personally, I would say she is one of the wisest, kindest, most generous, and also very curious people I have ever met. So welcome, Cathy.
Thank you. It's extremely good to be here.
Oh, very good. So how are you today? I think you are in your writing room, aren't you?
I am, yeah. You can. This is my book that's on the wall behind me at the moment. Actually, I'm pretty good today because I've been a little bit ill, but today I've got that wonderful feeling of not being ill, and I've been writing, and that's been going well, and I feel calmer than I sometimes do. So yeah, I'm feeling pretty good, and I was looking forward to this. I like you, Beck. I like talking about writing. I felt excited about doing it with the people. So yeah. I feel good.
Oh, excellent, excellent. And you have literally got your book on the wall all around you, haven't you, on Post-it notes? So we've got a real sneak peek into your process, actually.
Shall I show you the wall? Look, so it's going out.
Oh, yeah.
And it's going all the way along there.
Oh, ooh.
And actually, opposite me, there's more of it because I've started. There was the bits that were over there started as I typing them. I've putting them somewhere else. So I'm really going for it with, and I've just looked over there. So I've got another book on that wall. And I've got another book on that wall. And I'm really almost like allowing for ages I've been saying things like, oh, what I really want is just like a big white wall. And then I thought, like, well, should I just give that to myself? Given that I can now, why I have all these instincts and urges and then I don't act on them. I just keep trying to joylessly tap it out on a computer because that will save time in the long run, which I don't actually think is even true. So yeah, I'm going for it. If I could show you this, I mean, I could show you the table, I'm trying to remember what's on it, as in, no. I mean, I'll just show you how messy it is. It's just mess. But again, I'm allowing that because that seems to be what I need at the moment at this point in the process. So I've got sort of piles of paper and peculiar drawings, and look, this is the first bit of manuscript of the book, but I've now typed it out and I've gone through it and I'm cutting it up and sticking bits of it on the wall, putting it together like that. So it's a new way of constructing, which I think is working.
I absolutely love it. I mean, I am obsessed with writers' spaces as much as I am with their habits and routines, and I'm sure we're going to get to those later as well. So thank you for showing those. And actually, I am going to ask if you can show people your T-shirt, because it is one of my absolute favorites. I've seen this on Instagram before.
So there we go. It says, careful or you'll end up in my next novel.
So warning, what questions get asked?
That's the thing. And my friend Lizzie gave me this T-shirt because she is in my novel, or specifically her kitchen is in my novel, and her dishwasher is in my novel, and some with her permission, like got a lot of stuff about her children carefully done and anonymized is in my novel, and quite a lot of stuff about her husband is in my novel, again with their permission. So so it sort of amuses me, and I think it's kind of interesting.
No, it is. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. Now, we can see you there in your writing room with everything around you to support you now. And I want to sort of take you back to your early or almost pre-writing days, actually. So I'm really interested in, I suppose, the beliefs and myths that we take on as writers. And right in chapter 1, Chris and I opened the book with a story about Cheryl Strayed, who is a memoirist who wrote Wild, which went on to be made into an Oscar-nominated movie. You know, she's a best-selling, very, very successful author. But before she did that, she judged herself, believing that she wasn't a writer, that she was a working class woman working as a waitress. And she was taking on board pieces of advice, such as, if you don't write daily, you're not a proper writer. And it struck me when I was going through your books that you tell a very similar story. And I'm going to quote this back at you, which can be slightly mortifying. So bear with me, but it's the idea within it that we can explore. So you wrote, I grew up wanting to write, but was never encouraged. As I got older, I lost my childhood enthusiasm, and more I allowed myself to be told that people like me couldn't be a writer, that it was too hard, too difficult to get published, too impossibly out of reach. So although I'd try, I would give up, because when the going got tough, I would brood on this negative belief.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it just makes me feel really sad. Not for myself, actually, but just for the fact that other people get told that. I mean, it's just such a dreadful thing, isn't it? People are being told that right this second. Maybe not this second because they're not currently in school.
Yeah.
But people are told that, and I do find it really sad. And that did happen to me. And I was very lucky because I had encouraging parents. And I always find this really interesting because my dad, who, I mean, he couldn't read and write until he was an adult, still isn't good at, like, still can't really write very well, but he was always very encouraging of me. I mean, much more so, I think, than my friends' fathers. So I was very encouraged in the home. But yeah, outside of the home, whenever I said something like, oh, I want to be a writer, which I did from when I was really, like, as soon as I knew what a book was, I wanted to write one. And I would say it, and I remember saying it because I remember, again, I wanted to be a writer or a detective, because I was really in all those Enid Blyton books. So I wanted to either write books, I wanted to be one of the detectives in it. So again, it was that desire. And of course, I didn't know what being a detective would be like. And I'm sure I wouldn't actually be able, I don't feel, I mean, I've just got nothing but admiration for people that work in those services that bring them into a lot of conflict with the hard edge of what human beings are capable of. And I actually don't think that I could do that. But yeah, I'd say I wanted to be a writer or a detective. And then people would just say, don't be silly. You can't do that. And then there was always this thing, if you work very hard, you might be able to become a teacher or get a job in a building society. Not that there's anything wrong with either of those things, but that was the only, if you like writing, work very hard, you might be able to be a teacher. If you are ambitious, work very hard, you might be able to get a job in a building society. And it was a big, like I did also quite admire the women who worked in the building society in the next village, because they did look that, I mean, that was career women for me. So yeah, so that was it. And I think these myths, these rules are so written into the culture that they kind of do become a little bit written on the body, and they're difficult to shunt off because, and there's sort of truth, isn't it? I remember talking about this with Tayari Jones, who's, I just interviewed her with her brilliant novel, An American Marriage, and it won the Women's Prize for Fiction the day after I interviewed her. But we talked about this, and she said it's that people are just frightened for you. They're just trying to manage your expectations. So it's not that it's not that when kids say they want to be a writer, it's not that the teacher should necessarily say to them, that's an excellent career prospect. That's going to work out really well financially. It's a really good idea to do that. You'll be able to have loads of children, never worry about paying your, so it's not necessarily that, but it's just that there's something that acknowledges, there's a truth, isn't there, that isn't just like, you can't do that because it's not sensible. But that's a wider truth. And I still think it was very, so like I said, my parents, especially my dad, I mean, it's not that my mum wasn't encouraging, she was, but my dad's always been like, fuck it, you can do whatever you like. Again, he's almost like so uneducated that he almost doesn't, and maybe it's because he's Irish, I've never been sure of this either, but he doesn't have that sort of, we must stay in our place vibe about him. He's much more sort of like, you want to do it, you just do it. And he thinks I'm a superhuman because I can read and write and speak the way I do. And I go on the radio, and as he always says, like, you sounded very posh on Radio 4, which of course he says in his light Irish accent. So he was always very encouraging, which I'm sure was extremely significant. I think it's a powerful thing for a woman to have any encourager, but particularly to have a male, to have your dad encouraging you is an astonishing privilege, I think. But then equally, I think I was just, I went to university, and the first people that ever took it seriously when I said I want to write books, almost the first person I met at university was Sophie, who's still my best friend. And she gave me, I'm also wearing my Lucky Writing cardigan, which she gave me for my birthday this year. But yeah, I said it to her, and she was just like, yeah, that would seem to be, that's the sense, like, and then I met her parents and her step-parents and her wider family, and they just always treated me like I was going to write books. And it was the first time it had ever happened to me that like this could be a possible thing. So yeah, quite profound.
Yeah, and it is, I mean, I think it is really profound how these myths, they can really come to define us, and that the beliefs that we have affect our behavior. So if we're told, you're not a writer, and then we start to believe we're not writers, we do stop writing. It happens to so many people very, very early on.
Well, I think so, because that the other part of the reason why it happens easily is because writing is hard. Yeah. And that's all my teaching comes from the place of, yeah, I'm not going to lie to you, writing is really hard. And actually, I'm not going to lie to you that making a living at writing is also really hard. But that doesn't think you shouldn't do it. I think you should do it. Do it. Yeah. And stop giving up. The thing is, basically, every time it's hard, our brain fills up, our mind fills up, our soul fills up, our heart fills up, our bodies fill up with all this crap we've scraped up along the way, all the stuff that the teacher said, or maybe that the less encouraging father said, or that everyone said, all the stuff we've read about on the internet, because there's like an amazing amount of bollocks talked about writing that's on the internet, like we've hoovered it all up, and every time it gets a bit difficult, it's just the easiest thing in the world to think, this isn't for me, this isn't meant to be. And the reason why I still think it's a miracle I finished anything, let alone finished 5 books. But the reason why I've done that is because I've just learned to not listen, like to not give myself doubt, like objective weight and value. And well, I don't keep going when it gets tough. I usually have some sort of variation on a nervous breakdown and start writing another book. I realized the other day, most of my books exist because I was stuck writing another book. And then it got to the point where I had to finish that book. And then I went back to so my novel was supposed to be, I was writing my novel before I even wrote my first book, but then it was supposed to be my second book. But then I wrote my second book and my third book because I was stuck writing that novel.
Yeah. Well, that seems a very good tactic that's worked incredibly well for you. And you were probably told, no, you need to finish a book before you start another. Again, it's
not to write more than one thing at a time. That's probably very good advice if you can take that advice. Like I always say to people, like, God, don't write more than one book at a time unless that's the only way you can do it. It's the only way I can do it. And I think that's the other thing about advice, which I always think is the most important thing that I ever want to say anything. And I'm glad I've thought of it, because if I ever do an event, the event can be so lovely, and then I will wake up in the night, basically like wanting to jump out the window because I forgot to say this thing. So I'm glad I said this thing, which is that any kind of writing advice, like all any writer can really do is say, this is what works for me. It's everything that works for me. It's because of who I am. It's because of how my brain is wired. It's because of the experiences I've had. It's because of the encouragement I had and the knocks that I had. It's really like super specific. And the thing is, I know that. So I'm really happy to, you know, I'll splash about left, right, and center. But the caveat is, people listening, if it doesn't work for you, just decide, oh, that's interesting, she does it like that. That's not my way. Maybe the next time I come to one of Beck's events, the person will be a bit more like me, or it will resonate more with me. But that's the absolute most important thing, that you're always looking for how you can make it work for you. And that when someone tells you something that's just like, that sounds completely bananas, it might be because you're really different for them. But equally, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, writers lie a lot because loads of writers don't want to admit loads of writers don't want to admit how half-assed the process is. Loads of writers don't want to admit that the table's really messy and that the book's in bits because they're they're just too frightened. And I think that, you know, like writing gurus of mine, none of whom I know in real life, would be like George Saunders, Hilary Mantel, Ali Smith. And when I listen to them, I think, oh, that's my process. The difference between, I'm not comparing myself to them as a practitioner, but the process difference isn't different. The difference is they seem to be more reconciled with the fact that that's how it works. Whereas I keep getting angry with myself that I can't just churn out a book like a good little accountant with a critical path spreadsheet planner. And that's like that's what the difference is. That again, I'm still stuck in this thing of, if I was better, like one day I'll be able to do this better, and at that point everything won't look like such a bomb site, and I won't look like a bomb site. So that's the thing. A lot of nonsense is talked about writing because, and again, for individual writers, I don't think I understand why you do it. I mean, I've got friends who do it. They sort of self-protect. They say like, well, I had to make something up because I couldn't just say, you know, when they said, where do you get your ideas from? I couldn't say, I don't fucking know. Like, so I made up loads of stuff. And I understand why they do it. But the problem then, everybody in the audience goes off and tries that. And then they get disappointed when it doesn't work. And that's why I was thinking about this. But why am I honest about my process? Because I don't admire my writing particularly. I get why Hilary Mantel, Ali Smith and George Saunders, Max Porter, I get why they can be honest about their process because they're like actual geniuses. But I'm not. I'm just a fuck up who somehow has managed to finish 5 books, a mystery to me. And then I thought it's because especially if it's in the service of other people's writing, it'd be different if I was just on stage talking about a book, but in the service of other people's writing, more than my own fear of my own inadequacy, it's just this burning need to just tell the truth about what it's like, and just the horror that I could do to someone else what anyone has done to me when they say like, oh no, you can't do that, and oh no, well no, but if you can't make a plan, then you definitely can't do it. And well, no, if you wanted to write, you'd write like that. I mean, that was about 20 years I basically spent biting my nails and shivering because I could hardly get a word down, you know, all that. So I just never want to do that to anyone fraudulently. I hope I don't I hope I don't put people off by telling the truth, but at least if I put people off by telling the truth, I've told the truth, haven't I?
You've told the truth. Yes. So there's so much in there, Cathy, but I want to pick up on a couple of points. So one that we really figured out, that Chris and I, when we were writing the book, well, actually working with writers over the past 10, 20 years, is that this kind of sense that productivity is personal, that sense that you've got to figure out what it is for yourself. So what did that look like for you? How did you figure out like how to write the first book, and then it changed when you wrote the second and the third? I mean, how do you keep present with your writing and keep present with your practice?
I mean, they're all very good questions. I'll tell you that, and I love actually talking about the granular detail of it, because I think that's where it's all at. It's like saying, but again, I just want to caveat it with, it may seem as I explain all this that I sort of always knew what I was doing, but I didn't. I tell you what, I thought of this metaphor yesterday. I was talking to a friend, again, calming her down because she's started to panic about various things, whereas actually she's very much on the right track. She just needs to, every time she gets like knocked over in the wave of her own despair, she just needs to bring herself back to what she's trying to do and crack on.
Yeah.
And as I was talking to her, I said, it's a bit like in Rapunzel, where the prince gets chucked out of the tower and blinded. I remember I had one of those Ladybird books when I was a girl, and I was always struck by this picture of the prince like blundering around in the thorns. And I said to her, it's just like that. And the only thing I know is that you just have to be like that for a bit. Whereas because you're earlier on in your writing career, every time you feel like that, you want to ask for help. It's not a bad thing to ask for help if someone can help you. But what I've learned now is I just have to blunder around in the thorns a bit. And then at some point, don't know quite why, but it's something to do with blundering around in the thorns. Again, the fairy godmother will appear and tap my eyes and I will see the answer. So that's kind of the metaphorical thing. Practically, with my first book, I mean, I don't know, it exists, doesn't it? So I must have done it, but I honestly find it difficult. I do know how I did it because I was working, I had 2 jobs, and my son was basically like between 2 and 4 when I was writing that book, which is like really hard work. But what I did was I started trying to write in 2 shifts a week. And the first time I tried it was on a Saturday night after Matt was in bed, and I was just too knackered. And then I thought, and then I didn't, and it wasn't, and then I thought, then I again, I don't know, probably cried and got drunk and went to bed and gave up. But then at some point, maybe a couple of weeks later, maybe a couple of months later, I can't remember. At some point I thought, actually, for the book, it needs to be first thing. But on Saturday night, I could do my work emails. I think on Saturday night, I could do work, different types of work, the sort of work where I don't really have to have a brain, the sort of just ploughing through my inbox work. I could do that on Saturday night, and then I can buy myself, I think I started with 3 hours, but basically Tuesday and Thursday morning, I bought myself time by working at night at work and then put it into the diary first thing. I quickly worked out actually 2 hours was enough. The person who'd suggested that to me, an author called Tom Palmer, he said 3 hours, again, which is his bag. But as I did it, I just quickly realized, you know what, if I can do 2 hours, I can pull the plug, because I'm not going to do anything after 2 hours. And that was how I did it. And time was very short. And again, you've got to kind of just rock your circumstances, I think. So if you are in a situation where your time is short, you just got to think, well, okay, the benefit of that is there's not enough time to fuck around. So I used to do that. And on Sundays, we'd go to Kew Gardens, and my husband would take Matt off to see, there was like a bird feeding area. I mean, it was the rats that he liked. But they'd leave me in this place called the Orangery, and there was no Wi-Fi. And they'd leave me there for 2 hours, and then they would come back like 2 hours and 30 seconds later. And I'd have to have done the work. It would have felt incredibly fraudulent to me by that time to find some way of skiving off. So that was it. So I think those were 2 hours in 3 different shifts. And that was how I did it. Then, of course, as time's gone on, I'll often have more time. But the thing, often when people can't write, if they haven't got enough time, they think it's the problem. And then if they solve that and get time, they then find out that it wasn't time that was the problem. So most of what I do, I say this and people think it's a joke, but it's not. So writing for me is 95% self-doubt management and 5% like, oh, I think this sentence will sound a bit better if I chop it in 2. And that's really true. And it's not that the 5% isn't really important, because I just love, once I stop being terrified, I love all the nerdy stuff about, first or third person, and what happens if I put in a flashback. Should I do this? And I love all that, but it's still only 5%, because the 95% of the self-doubt management is so massive. And so what I do now is it's all about how to start. So I put all my energy into how do I start, and then how do I stay in the room? And if I do that, then the rest will sort of sort itself out. And I can tell you more later about how I do that.
Yeah, I love that advice, how to start and then how to stay in the room. I mean, that beats the kind of writing is just putting, sitting in the chair and writing. It's start, stay in the room. I really like that description. I mean, it's the quote that you gave for the book, where you said, it's a seductive myth that if we start writing on day 1, then we will gradually get better and more confident as time goes on. In my experience, this is simply not true. because writing is a tug of war between desire and fear, and therefore feels much more like a hazardous zigzagging. And I think that's it. It's that, oh my gosh, for every step forward, it's a step backwards, you know, that yes, the more we do it, you know, if we are, you know, working at our craft, we will get better, but it doesn't mean you're going to get more confident, and you're not going to see that as a straight line. That relationship is just not simple.
No, and you do get better technically, but I think as well,
Yeah.
the more you do, I think when you start out, you think you've just got to acquire technical skills and then everything will be okay. And then I think the more I do it, certainly, the more, again, so recently I've reconciled to the 95%, 5% thing. Like, again, after I finished my first book, I thought, oh, fantastic, I now know how to finish a book. And then I started the next book. You know, and that's been the case with every book. Kind of like, oh, and then I just waste loads of time. This is the time wasting thing. And then waste loads of time being very angry with myself that I haven't learned more. Why have I not learned more? How can, you know, I've written my first book and people liked it. And now everybody thinks I'm brilliant and someone's paying me money to write another book and I can't do it. What kind of idiot am I? I should have been lucky to get a job in that building society. They were all right. I don't deserve, you know, really horrible, painful, unpleasant, jabber, 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 jabber. So I've just kind of reconciled that every book just brings different, almost like psychological challenges, even if you think it won't. Like, all writing is complex. Yeah. Writing the self is definitely complex, but I think I would say that all writing is writing the self, even if you say it's a science fiction novel set on Mars. I still think it's probably, like, in some way the self. So I think probably all writing is complex, and then they'll all bring different challenges in their wake, but they won't probably bring the same. Like, so with my novel, I got stuck for ages because I just had too many point of view characters and couldn't work out how to fix it. And, like, I won't ever do that I won't make that mistake again. I won't make that mistake in a novel again. And in the same way, the novel I'm writing at the moment, so I've got one so again, I've learned I had too many characters. Now I've just got one. I mean, when you think how many books I've read, and that I'm 50 years old and I've been reading books my entire life, you kind of think maybe I'd have clocked that before, but I didn't, because that, again, that's the amazing thing about writing. This is really one of the great benefits of it. Like, it will improve your, like, I could never have learned about books the way I've learned by trying to write them. I'm a much better reader in the sense of understanding what's going on in the text now that I try to write them. But again, I've got 110,000 words of the novel, and then when I finish this book I'm writing at the moment, I'll then edit that. But I've been, and again, it's good for me, I think, to have that period, because I've been thinking about it a lot the last couple of days. Always a good sign. I woke up this morning having dreamt a new first line for it, and this is where that I could sob. That's why you do it, even though so often it's awful, because every so often you dream a bit of your book. And I didn't even realize how, I mean, like, I'm crying with joy now. I wasn't crying with joy this morning. I just woke up thinking, like, oh, I just dreamt a new first line. And then I thought, but that doesn't really make sense. And I spent ages thinking, but that isn't true, because hotels don't have silken sheets, so it has to be cotton sheets. Or would you say Egyptian thread sheets? But I don't think she'd even know about Egyptian threads. I hardly know about Egyptian threads, blah, blah. And then I like forgot all about it. And then this afternoon I was chopping onions and I thought, oh, actually, it was a gift. And then I allowed my logical mind to get involved. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what it is. And then when my novel comes out next summer, you can see if it's the first line. Last night I slept in silken sheets. Yeah. And I know that the character, who's called Anne, and I knew this already happened in the novel, but I didn't know it actually happened at the beginning. Like, it's going to be the frame. That's what I think now. This is going to be the new first couple of pages. And she's on a train and she's looking out of there's rain on the window, and she's looking out of the window through the rain at the people in the distance. And last night she slept in silken sheets in this hotel where she shouldn't have been. And she's on her way back to the life that's her actual life, where she should be. Yeah. But again, I'm not working on the novel at the moment, and maybe it isn't. Maybe at some point in the future, when I'm doing an event for that novel, one of you here will come up to me. Let's imagine we're in real life, because that's always nice. And you'll say, like, oh, but the first line isn't, last night I slept in silken sheets and she's not on the train. And I'll say, what? And you'll remind me that I was very excited about this moment and crying because I'd had this moment in my sleep. And again, that's what I've learned, that either of those things might be true, and they're both fine. It's fine, because every bit of writing we do, every work is a shadow of its future self. Every bit of writing we do, it's on the way to something. So it doesn't matter whether the first line is last night I slept in silken sheets, or whether it's something else, or whether she's even on the like, none of that matters. What matters is that I dreamt that last night and it's making me cry with joy right now.
Yeah.
And that,
well, and I just find it's really that, again, that there's that interplay between the kind of the imagination and the unconscious and the logical. And again, if we go back to this idea that writers explaining how they write, it isn't always clear. And you say that, you know, they can be lying. They're trying to sort of present a story or a formula to what they do, when actually it is quite chaotic and unexpected, and you can't always plan for it. You can plan sometimes when to write or where to write and some of these surrounding areas, but actually the process is as you say, the zigzagging.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, that's what I do. I put all my efforts planning wise into just making time and space. That's like my only job, and then beyond that I try to allow the work to bubble away on its own. But again, that's still quite a new thing. With most books, I'll again have some panicky sense that I should try to learn how to do it better next time. Or I was talking about a friend of mine who's published lots of books. She's extremely successful and brilliant and much loved. And she said, you know what, before I start the next novel, I want to go on a writing course anonymously so I can learn how to plan. And that's exactly the sort of thing I think. Loads of published writers say this, and we have long chats about how we could ethically do things anonymously, because you can't do it as yourself, because then people will be weird with you when you're doing your cooking shift at Arvon. You know, it's that kind of thing.
Yes.
But actually, what it is what everybody needs. It's not that going on writing courses is bad. It's great. But but what everyone needs is just to stop thinking there's some solution they don't know, you know, and again, a lot of writers who've published lots of books very successfully give themselves an awfully hard time about the fact that it's often a bit chaotic and difficult, and then they don't know how to say that to the person from the Observer who comes to interview them, so they make a load of shit up, and they then have to remember it, because people will say like, well, of course you get up at 5 o'clock, don't you, and write till 8:30, and then they think like, and then, oh yeah, I must have said that at some point. I didn't
so that wasn't getting quoted back. I'd
written it all on my phone whilst in the waiting room at the vets, you know, so that kind of thing.
And that's it, you know, writers change. One thing I really love about your books is you actually do ask other people for their advice, and you can be quite horrified by their advice. I mean, what did you say at the where is it? It's your inspiring addendum in How to Feel Better. And you say, I find it both comforting and stimulating to map myself against other humans. I like getting tips, but I equally enjoy thinking, well, I'd never want to do that. And it's that sense of being able to ask for advice and then learn to reject it, and trust your senses where that's not going to work for you.
And the curiosity, I think, which you said about me at the beginning, and I really like that, because I do try I think curiosity is the great antidote to fear and worries about your own inadequacy, etc. So whenever I can shift into curiosity, and it's such a good space to be in as well, because it's something about being curious as well means you're not judgmental, which again, I never feel that's not a creative vibe for me. Basically, being frightened or judgmental just isn't a good creative setup. So I am very interested in, I mean, I'm just really interested in other people and the granular details of their lives. And I always have been, but like even more so at the moment. I love it if someone just tells me like what time they eat, or I get really excited about like, and someone told me the other day, like, oh, I always make, every time I cook, I make two teas. So they make double, they don't always cook, but when they do, they always make double portions. I love, there was just something about that. I just thought that's just really exciting to me somehow. I don't know why it's so exciting, but it is. I just like all that granular stuff. I find it very interesting. And again, interesting when I think like, oh yeah, I'll try that. Or interesting when I equally think like, there's no way I would do it. but not with any judgment, just kind of like but I think that's the excitement as well, that we don't have to be like everyone else. We can be our own selves and they can be their own selves. And that's the exciting thing for me. Not that we should all try to somehow morph or dilute into the lowest common denominator of humanity, but that we should just be, I like doing this. Oh, and you like doing that. Hooray! Isn't it nice we both exist? You know, that kind of thing.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I'm aware that we're just racing through time at the moment. If people have got questions, do pop them into the chat and we'll see if we can make time for them or download the chat afterwards and return to them. And I'm really interested. So your work is you are an encourager of writers. You have worked with so many different people. And your Sunday sessions at the moment, I think, are sort of pulling together. I think it's almost like a lifetime of thinking about writing and encouraging people to write. And there's a very famous story which you gets quoted back to you a lot, but I want to talk about it again, which is when Matt Haig talks about in Reasons to Stay Alive, how he lacked the confidence to write that book. And you were the person who told him to do it. And of course, it has gone on to sell millions. I mean, it's just a hugely, hugely successful book. And he called you one of the most dynamic and frankly brilliant advocates of books, championing their cause, and in his case, causing them to exist. And of course, that happened over wasabi flavored popcorn. And it's a great story. But what I found really interesting is that his book came out in 2015. And your first book came out in 2016. So you were just literally, of course, you were in the world of writing, but you weren't a published writer. So you have been encouraging people to write for such a long time. And it almost feels like, I love that sort of belief. I think Julia Cameron calls it a believing mirror. You know, you just need people to champion you, to give you permission to do something. And that we often think as writers that we need lots of writers around us, but actually just having someone, as you said, it can be your dad saying, you can do this, makes such a difference.
I think, yeah, because I was a bookseller for 10 years. So, and I always think it's very generous of Matt that he put that in the acknowledgement. And he often talks about podcasts and stuff. And of course, because he's now so super famous, I'll get a little rush of communications. All friends of mine will say, like, I didn't know you were behind Matt Haig's book. So I wouldn't ever, again, just to be clear, I wouldn't ever myself bring it up. Like if we'd had that conversation and he didn't ever tell anyone about it, I wouldn't go on about it. I wouldn't think it was my business. Because again, the creative process is very delicate and fragile. We had a conversation that was useful to him, but he was then the person that did the stuff that needed to be done. So I don't have a sense of ownership or anything. I just think it's really lovely. And what is interesting about it for me is thinking like, yeah, why was I so confident? But I'd been a bookseller for 10 years. And at the time I was running a literacy charity. And what I felt really needed to happen, and Matt had written, I think, a couple of blogs for Book Trust about mental health. What I felt really what was really needed, and again, this is my deep knowledge of like my dad as a non-read, like it's a great gift, I think, to me to have had my dad who couldn't read and write until he was an adult, still not confident. What I really felt needed to exist about depression, and it's difficult to remember now, this is a few years ago, like there's loads of awareness now and loads of chat and lots of people talking about it. There was almost literally nothing, hardly anything. What I felt needed to exist was a book. And I remember saying this is going to make me cry. I felt we needed a book so that that would work for the 19-year-old boy who can't get out of bed and doesn't understand why. And for his father, who's never read a book in his life and doesn't understand why. So something really simple, bullet points, lists, like actively not a literary book made for people who would read, actively something useful that just set out really simply and clearly to sort of slightly explain a little bit about what's going on and offer some hope, not in a fraudulent way, but in it can happen and it can be all right in the future-ish. And that's what I thought was necessary. And lots of people didn't agree with me. I said to a friend of mine in publishing, like, oh, I think that we should read this book. And she, again, this is a very like important, brilliant person. She just said like, oh, yeah. No one will want, no one will want to buy that.
Yeah. Like, right. But I think we can't underestimate how much that encouragement matters. Someone's put in the chat that you had praised a sentence that they'd written about 5 years ago, and that gave them the encouragement to keep writing, and they're 2/3 of the way through the memoir. So thank you, Cheryl, for sharing that, because I think it does make a real difference. And I think what we do, even before we write, if we just encourage other people, it can make a huge difference. Just listening to them, hearing your friends talk about their writing and moan about their writing, or tell you their writing dreams, and just acknowledging that can make such a difference.
The other reason as well why I think Matt Haig is generous in the way he talks about his process is because he will say, like, he talked about it as like X Factor on Word documents. It shows how long ago that is, because again, the X Factor was on telly.
Yeah.
He would just have 4 Word documents going and keep adding to them, and sooner or later one of them would slightly rise up to the top, and that's how he was doing it. And again, at the time, I think I was trying to write, but I was very bowed down by the fact that I was probably doing it wrong. And and I tell you, the other thing he did for me was, because I was trying to write my book, and I was just stuck and didn't think I could do it. And I think I didn't really tell people I was doing it, but for some reason I had confided in him, and he said, "How's it going?" And I said, "It's just awful. I don't think I can do it. I think I just need to stop." And he said, "Well, how much have you written?" I said, 30,000 words. He just said, "Everyone hates the 30,000 word stage." And it was that, and it was like the sun came out, the birds started. I was like, oh, everyone hates the 30,000 word stage. This isn't just me being bad and awful and terrible and wrong. And it's that, I think, that universality. So I just say hello to Cheryl, a workshop in Manchester 5 years ago. I remember that workshop because I don't go to Manchester that often. It was very nice. And I often still do an exercise I did in that workshop. So nice to see you again, Cheryl.
Well, it works. So I'm good. Can we do some quick fire questions? Because we've got lots that have come through in the chat. Now let me think what is going to be a good one to start with. So you said what you try to do is how to start and stay in the room. What do you do now? Just in a minute, and I'll go through so I can cycle through some more questions.
So I'm actually doing a new thing with a friend, which is where we sit on an open Zoom link with each other. And something about having her there means I don't bolt. We're mainly doing it for me because I'm a great bolter. So we're mainly doing it for me, but she's enjoying it as well. And although she can discipline herself and stay in the room, she's benefiting it. So I'm doing that on a schedule. We're doing 10 till 12. And then if available, we then have lunch with each other, again on Zoom in the kitchen. And there's just something really nice and companionable about it. And it takes the fear edge off for me. What I'm finding as well is I have to do the 10 till 12 with her, but earlier and earlier, I'm basically turning up and just wanting to get going earlier and earlier. So that's how I start. The rules for me are, this is the really important bit. I'm not allowed any other technology. I'm not allowed to look stuff up. I'm not allowed to convince myself like, oh, well, maybe I'd better ask Beck about that event we're doing tonight. No Twitter, no whatever. I have my phone, but in case school ring, like, Matt's fallen off or whatever, but which is quite a lot, but that's the only reason I have my phone. And I've basically set my phone up so it has very little else on it, and I've just trained myself to not look at other things. If I do that, then I just need to start and stay in the room, but it's controlling my access to other things. Perfect.
And it is, so much of our writing is about that environment, that what triggers good or bad habits. And if other people like that idea of the Zoom, they should check out FocusMate. So you can literally link up with anybody in the world. It's a brilliant system. So if you haven't got a writing buddy, or you're too scared to connect with somebody and ask for it, try FocusMate. It's really, really fun for that. How do you manage self-doubt? It's a really big question. Just in a few seconds.
I just accept that it's there. So it's never going to go away, but I've tamed it from a jabbering monkey sitting on my shoulder, sometimes to a lovely old Labrador lying under my feet. And if I put my feet on him, he even warms me up a bit. I did write a lot about this in my book, Write It All Down, with advice given to me by some therapist friends. It's a big subject, but that's accepting. There's the measure of acceptance. The paradox is, when I accept that writing is going to be difficult and not enjoyable, it somehow immediately becomes not difficult and more enjoyable.
Yeah, and I definitely found that when I was running the Writers' Retreat Centre and meeting hundreds of writers, it was the successful ones weren't the ones who had found ways, hadn't found systems or had better habits. They were more able to live with the uncertainty. And that's what kept them going, is they understood that was part of the process and that they could continue to write with all of that going on. And that's hard, that's really hard. But there wasn't a kind of a magic system that they'd necessarily. So yeah, acceptance makes a big difference.
Can I answer Trina's question, Beck? Can I read it?
Oh, go for it. Yeah.
It's shone out at me. Trina, I think we're soulmates and possibly our brains work the same way. Trina says, how do you switch between projects? I do this, but very unsuccessfully. It's like an excuse not to work on the other thing. Yes. It's all those things. But what I've realized is that's fine. So like if it's an excuse, if you have to have an excuse not to work on, if you need to feel you're continually on the sky, that's how you want to feel. So I've realized I never really want to work on the thing I'm supposed to be working on. I always want to work on the skivy secret squirrel side project. So at the moment, I've got 2 books that I am finishing. I'm under contract for them. They need to exist. So I'm putting effort into those. But equally, I've got like I've got an ideas file. I've got mind maps everywhere of all the books I might write. I just capture it all. And I don't, a bit like this morning when I woke up, don't say no to the muse. So don't say like, oh, I just dreamt a new first line for the novel, but I'm not working on the novel now, so I'm not allowed to listen to my dream. You know, so again, get yourself away from that slightly joyless, how can I squeeze the most amount of word count out of myself, and into the, you know what, if I have to convince myself that, you know, if I only work when I'm skiving off from something else, I'll just have another project, and maybe you can trick yourself for a bit that the fake project is the real project, if you know what I mean. So it's trickery and laughs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what about, we've got a question about waiting for publishers. So dealing with rejection. So we've talked about doubt, which is our own feelings. And then rejection is when we get feedback from others. You've got some really good advice on like writing for yourself and writing for others and sort of the vulnerability of those phases.
Yeah, I mean, I think waiting to hear from publishers, waiting to hear from agents, but also then once you are published, waiting to hear whether, I don't know, a retailer's going to like your book, or whether, you know, oh, you're down to the last 3 for Radio 4 Book of the Week. But, you know, I've never been Radio 4 Book of the Week, so I don't know who those other fuckers are that keep making it. Do you know what I mean? It's just the point that it doesn't stop. You think that rejection will stop when you get published or get an agent, but actually it doesn't. So you're always waiting. So the thing I would offer you, and it's again a bitter truth, is you might as well learn how to cope with rejection a bit, because it will always be part of your writing life. And it doesn't matter, I don't think, how successful you get. And I know writers who are much more successful than I am, and they still find it very hard when they've just found out that, you know, the book that's been optioned isn't going to go to the next stage, or it just is part of it. I find it very difficult to deal with. I find it incredibly hard to deal with. I do think the advice to start something new, I think there's definitely something about, it's just think about what you can control and what you can't control. And I spend most of my life, not just my writing life, trying to put all my focus and attention into the thing I can control, and try to take my focus and attention out of the stuff that I can't control. So now when I, again, publish a book, very anxiety inducing, I just think of it as, right, I've got the book, tossing it into a little wooden boat, pushing it out to sea, and then the elements will do their thing. Do you see what I mean? And to a certain extent as well, publishers, agents do the same thing. Make it as good as you can, toss it into the boat, push it out to sea. This won't be easy. And then just think, well, okay, I wanted to have something to a good enough stage that I felt ready to send it off to agents or publishers. I've done that. Go me. How do I want to celebrate? And what am I going to start? What's my new thing going to be? And that's what I would say about that.
Yeah. And if people haven't read Cathy's Write It All Down, I mean, I really, it's so full of encouragement, and there's so much advice about that starting phase and then going through that whole publication process. And I would say it's sort of said it's for memoirists, but actually is for all writers. I would say would gain a huge amount of wisdom and comfort and very practical advice from that. Cathy, we are out of time after my technical problems at the beginning. I'm aware we haven't answered all the questions, so I'll download the chat and see what they are. It's been it's just absolutely flown past. I mean, you have just shared such insight into your own writing, but also that, and your writing room as well, that glimpse behind the screen, behind the page of what really goes on, and your multiple books on all of your walls. Is there anything you'd like to sort of wrap up with? Is there anything you'd like to sort of advise people?
Well, just that I really do hope you do it. And again, kind of do it anyway. Like, so like if it doesn't get published, if it does get published, but then you're not Book of the Week on Radio 4, if it does get, you know, all that stuff, the thing that what I hope is, if there's a parallel universe where my first book, where I wrote my first book, but it didn't get published, which could very easily have happened. I really hope that me in that universe knows that the most important thing is that I wrote the book and that I printed it out, and it's like over there in the corner of the room in one of those lever arch files. That's the most important thing. And we can all have that. That's not in the power of publishers and other people's opinion. And you might think, I would have thought this, I think, if I'd been listening to me back along, like, oh, it's easy for you to say now that you've got that. But when I got in a pickle a while ago, I can't even remember when, I'm basically always in a pickle. And it's always much worse than I say publicly, because publicly I always feel quite good, because I like Beck and I like all of you. I like being with people. It's alone that's difficult for me. So I always feel quite buoyant when I'm here, aren't I? It can't be that bad, is what I think in the moment. But I got in a pickle a while ago and I fixed it by thinking, actually, again, I'm now enslaved by the idea that if people don't like this book, I won't get another book deal. So this life will come crashing down and I'll have to be a barmaid again. And I'm now a bit old and I've got a bad back. And I don't know if I would want to put up with the men making comments about my breasts anymore, which I could cope with when I was in my early 20s, but blah, 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 on and on and on and on. And I suddenly thought, actually, I can always write. The only thing that's in the power of other people is whether I get paid to do it. And that was just like, yeah, I'm going to write all my life. I'm going to be able to write all my life because I'm allowed to. No one can stop me. And I'm going to do it all my life. And that's what I would say. That's what I would gift to you. And if my next book, maybe this doesn't work and my next book is awful, and if the novel doesn't work out and nobody buys that one, nobody buys the next one, or this doesn't work and I go, mad and don't manage to finish anything, then, but let's not do that one. Let's just do that if I do finish them, but nobody buys them, so I don't get another book deal. Still, like, I'll work out what to do. I'll work out how to earn a living some other way. And this will just be a peculiar window of being published in a much bigger life of writing.
Yeah. And
that, I think, is the way to cope with the idea of rejection and other people of publishing. Like, whatever your situation is, think of it as the publishing really is the smallest bit in what writing offers you and your life. So, yeah. And thank you, all of you, and Beck, because I have had a wonderful time.
Well, thank you so much. And if people want to hear more from Cathy, sign up to her newsletter. She's occasionally on Twitter. She's definitely on Instagram, sharing lovely photos of mainly daily swimming, which I would say is probably one of the most important routines of your writing life, actually, getting down to the sea most days. So it's cathyreadsbooks.com. I'll put it in the show notes as well. So brilliant newsletter. Do check out all her books if you haven't read them already. And I'm Beck. I am the co-author of Written, How to Keep Writing and Build a Habit That Lasts. You can find out all about me and Chris at prolifico.com. And I just want to thank you all for your time and your energy and attention and showing up tonight and sharing your brilliant questions. It has been an absolute blast. And I just love having proper, honest conversations about what it's really like writing. So thank you so much, Cathy.
Massive pleasure.
Thank you.